Welcome to the Responsible Bytes podcast, everyone. The podcast where we talk about all things safe and responsible technology. I'm your host, Dr. Zena Assad, and today I'm joined by the incredible, amazing Tracey Spicer. Welcome to the podcast, Tracey.
Oh, thank you for the kind words, Senna. I love your work, so it's a delight to be on the podcast.
It's so lovely to have you on the podcast, Tracey, and I don't feel that I need to do a very long introduction because I think most people will know who you are. You've been in this field for quite some time and you've got just such a wonderful profile. I've been following your work for quite a bit of time.
Oh, thank you. I'm but a humble journalist. I'm not an academic, but one of the benefits of that is being able to have a helicopter view of what's happening in society, where we're going, and I suppose that's a lens I take to technology. So I can't wait to talk about this subject. It's my absolute favourite.
Well, I'm glad, and maybe we can jump straight into talking about the current state of the world. So I have a lot of friends in the US, and when I talk to them about what's currently happening, they say that while they are concerned, the day-to-day hasn't really changed for them. But when I watch the news, I see all this crazy, crazy stuff, and I think, my God, the US is crumbling. And I think one of the things that's quite unique about the current state of affairs in the US is this interconnection between the technology industry and politics. And we really haven't seen that in quite some time. So what do you think are some of the implications that come with those two sectors coming together so intimately like they are now?
When people are living right in the heart of this, for example, living in the United States, it's very hard to step back and see what's happening from a big picture perspective. But from our position in Australia, it's easy to have a bit more objectivity. We're living through the fourth industrial revolution, and a lot of things will become clearer in retrospect. But one thing that is absolutely clear to me right now is that we've been living in a techno-capitalist society for quite some time now, and what we're seeing in America is the rise of these tech oligarchs, where not only do we have an enormous amount of power in very few hands, with very few regulations, legislation, very few people holding them back effectively. But in the last, I guess, 6 months or so, it's taken that step further, where these tech oligarchs are in the bowels, I guess, of government and using their influence and power to help themselves. And Elon Musk is a classic example of that. It's frightening because those barriers between government and business, which I guess in America with the free market have always been pretty weak barriers anyway, have broken down entirely.
Yeah.
And who knows what impact this will have on this generation and the generations to come. I mean, what are your thoughts sitting back and watching this unfolding?
For me, my biggest concern is the push for deregulation of technology in general, with the obvious focus being AI. And that's definitely come from the technology industry. This idea that regulation stops or limits innovation is just not correct. And so moving forward on the development of these technologies without any form of safeguards or guardrails, especially when we were just starting to see the momentum for that come up, is really disappointing and really concerning for me as well as somebody who works. So this is the crux of my research. It's about safe technology implementation and how you do that in an effective way and a proportionate way. Because sometimes we do see, the pendulum swing too far in either direction with regulation. And I think with the US, we're seeing it swing in the opposite direction with, JD Vance at the AI Action Summit talking about deregulation. And I think that the term he used was a deregulatory flavor, which was ridiculous. But it's really concerning for me to see it happening in the US as well, because this is where the technology is being developed. The biggest tech companies who hold monopoly are based in the US, and to see them push for deregulation with the development and the implementation of these technologies is really concerning.
There are a couple of aspects of what you just said there that are very frightening. And one is the fact that it happened so quickly. The very first day Donald
Yeah.
Trump was in power, he rescinded what Biden was putting in place with artificial intelligence. And then the next thing that I've seen, and this is only in recent days, is that other countries are starting to follow America's lead. I mean, even Europe, with its wonderful EU AI Act, has announced that it's going to build so many more data centres, water consuming data centres that are terrible for the environment. And usually we look to the EU for guidance on things like responsible development. You know, they're usually
Hmm.
pretty well balanced. But they're saying that they're now in a race with the United States and with China. And if they don't do this, they'll be left behind in the AI revolution. So it's not only affecting America, America sets the standard for the rest of the world because at the moment they are the preeminent empire, the largest economic power. In Australia, we tend to slavishly follow America. We've sort of moved a little bit away from following Britain. And so I wonder what impact this will have on the AI regulations that are likely to be announced very soon here in this country. Do you think we'll be looking to America more?
I think it's going to depend on the outcome of our election. So we're at a precipice point really here in Australia. We have our elections coming up, and I do believe that the outcome of our elections is going to dictate which way we swing. I think if we go one particular way, we might be a little bit more conservative than the US, but perhaps still following suit to some regard. And I think if we were to swing the other way, we would be full blown following the US. And both are concerning in their own way because really doing nothing is doing something. So even if we were to approach it in a very conservative way, but still following suit along the same direction, that's not great. It's not. And we're seeing the impacts of these technologies, and they're not all bad. Technology does have a lot of potential, a lot of positivity. It does bring a lot of advantages to society. That's great. We all agree with that. But those advantages don't come without their limitations and they don't come without their costs. And that's what the point of regulation is. And one of the challenges that Australia has is that we have unique things to Australia that the US doesn't experience. And so it's important for us to build regulation and guardrails that are uniquely Australian and that talk to Australian culture and Australian society. You know, we've got like huge agriculture here in Australia. We're actually leaders in agriculture. And so, you know, looking at these technologies in those domains and what that looks like, that's quite uniquely Australian. So for me, what I want to see is Australia following its own path and creating safety guardrails that are specific to Australian needs. And I'm concerned whether or not we're going to see that.
It's a really great point, particularly in the agriculture sector. There are so many tremendous benefits from artificial intelligence, machine learning, drone technology. And you're right, it's got to be bespoke to each country. I'm actually really interested in Canada's ADA Act, which I think has had its second reading, which to me is a really sensible way forward when it comes to regulation because it also looks at that critical aspect of gender bias, which my book Man Made really focused on. A lot of the regulation and legislation around the world isn't looking at that. Yet it's a huge conversation in the corporate sector. Every time you put into ChatGPT, show me an image of a lawyer, an accountant, even a librarian, an 80% female profession, it comes up with this image of a man. So this idea of men are the ones who should dominate the workforce and women are the ones who are the bosses at home from the 1950s is coming back again at pace. And while it's a conversation in the corporate sector and to a degree in households, governments still aren't there yet. I know that your
No, they're
focus is
not.
particularly on warfare and safety, and that's incredibly important and an existential risk. But the bias piece is being talked about less and less when it comes to, okay, what can we do with big tech? And I think with Donald Trump coming in, a lot of these tech oligarchs have been given the freedom to let their bigotry run rampant. They're not even pretending to try to de-bias their innovations anymore.
It's really true. And, you know, we're seeing a push for a lack of censorship on social media under the guise of free speech. And social media really is its own media platform. Like it is its own media platform in its own right, and it does have the power to sway public opinion. So, what are the risks that come with a lack of censorship on social media platforms? Noting that censorship is a double edged sword because when you do enforce censorship, it's somebody's opinion of what is and isn't acceptable. And that's not something people always agree on. So, what are the risks there of having that push of a lack of censorship?
I'd like to reframe this conversation a little bit through the lens of social media platforms being platforms. As a journalist for 38 years, I feel very strongly that they should have been denoted and labelled as publishers, not platforms, because then they
Interesting.
would be responsible, like media outlets are in the old school mainstream media, for what they publish. And they've been allowed to run rampant because they've been called simply platforms where people can express their opinions. So I think there's a legal aspect that was missing there. And really, governments have admitted that in retrospect, that they should have cracked down on social media a little bit more at the start before letting it run rampant. And that's a larger problem of having people in government who don't understand technology,
Yeah.
who aren't engaged with it. So there's a little bit of ignorance. There's a bit of, oh, we don't want to rein in innovation. We don't want to impact potential economic growth and all of that stuff. But on the censorship piece, and I always recoil from using the word censorship because to me, it's just trying to put steps in place to protect civil discourse in society and to stop people using hate speech and tearing each other down and going into silos of our own bigotry because that's what the algorithms push us into.
Yeah.
Surely we don't want to live in a world, and we live in the real world, which includes online as well as on the street, face-to-face interactions. We don't want to live in a world where people are attacking each other, calling each other names. Who wants that kind of environment? When it comes to pornography or sex trafficking or child sexual abuse, there's got to be some kind of restriction on content that's damaging to people. So, yes, I do agree with that kind of very sensible censorship. I know there are some tremendous AI innovations out there now through machine learning that are helping detect these things and take them down, but they're wildly imperfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes, there's no nuance to it. They're using this massive hammer to crack this nut, and that can be a really blunt instrument. What are your thoughts?
I I'm very interested in what you said about social media platforms and that they should be publishers. And I'm really interested in this idea how you think that there should have been some kind of legal guardrails there. I think what's uniquely interesting about social media is that it's driven by public engagement and it's driven by public user engagement. Do you feel like potentially with social media it was a case of it's too hard to try and put legal guardrails in place when you have individual people who will probably push back on the basis of their autonomy and their agency. So where I'm thinking of this from is, we're currently seeing things around data privacy, and there are ways that you can opt out of your data being used by social media to train AI. And the reason people are given that option is because it's this idea that it is your individual content and it belongs to you and you have a right to it. So do you feel like there's a tension there between this idea of, needing to have more legal guardrails for these technologies, but then personal rights and autonomy in the content that we share?
There is definitely a tension there, and you've picked up on that beautifully. I also remember distinctly when social media exploded. And I was a huge fan. I thought it was wonderful that for the first time, marginalised voices around the world were being heard like never before. There were no old school media gatekeepers that were only amplifying the same old voices, the heads of institutions. It was wonderful. It allowed grassroots civil rights and women's rights organisations to connect around the world effectively and quickly and powerfully for the first time. So, yes, certainly there are so many positives, and people should own their content, own their data, own their voices, absolutely. But I guess the example I would give is having worked in newspapers, radio, television, or all that kind of stuff across different mediums, is that there's got to be some responsibility for the voices that aren't appropriate for society to hear.
I agree with that.
Yeah, or if there's fake news, deliberate misinformation,
Mhm.
disinformation, propaganda, the fourth estate, the media, is incredibly important in a democracy. So it's not that people should lose the right to their content or their voices. It's that there needs to be effective content moderation simply from the publishers, whether it's the publishers of old media or new media, because we're living at a time where both of them have combined.
So, COVID and then recent geopolitical tensions are two fantastic examples of where social media needed censorship, but where people had quite a bit of backlash against that, arguing that the censorship was part of the reason they weren't getting all of the information they felt they were entitled to. So I think this is where a lot of the tension around censorship comes from. It's that point I made earlier that it's up to a person or persons to decide what is and isn't acceptable. And I think that media also does have some kind of responsibility to remain impartial in certain ways, right? So what's the risk of losing that impartiality, not only in media, but also on these social platforms?
Yes, the risk of losing that impartiality is enormous because when we have elections, we need to have appropriate information upon which to make our decisions. When we have a pandemic, we need to have accurate information about the risks and what we can do to mitigate those risks. You know, people died because of
Yeah.
misinformation and disinformation around COVID-19. And with an anti science approach in the health department in the United States, led by RFK, of course, we will see more deaths, we will see more injuries, we will see more pandemics. And that's absolutely frightening. So
Don't
this is
say
a
that
matter
to
of
me,
life and
Tracey.
death.
I just survived the first pandemic. I don't know if I can go through another one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess we're living in a time which is anti-science, and
Yeah,
it is important to listen, as you know, to the science and to the academics, whether it's about bird flu or what's coming next. We need to have this real important information. But I also feel a little bit uncomfortable about the word impartial because everyone has their own unconscious biases, even journalists. And that's why
that's
it's
true.
important to have some kind of moderation over the top. Otherwise, we could say something that we think is right, but we're not acknowledging our own unconscious biases in that. I mean, what are your thoughts?
So I'm thinking about COVID and what happened during, when the vaccines were being rolled out and we had the anti-vaxxers. And I felt like the anti-vaxxers sat in two groups. There were the ones who were, I don't understand, to be honest, why they were anti-vaxxers. It wasn't clear to me. But there was a second group where I didn't necessarily agree with them, but I understood where they were coming from. And this was the group who looked at the science and looked at the information and said, this vaccine has been developed in a rapid amount of time. I don't feel safe taking it because I don't feel that the appropriate amount of testing has been done. I want to wait until more testing has been done. And so while on a personal level, I didn't agree because for me, I was like, herd immunity, I'm going to get vaccinated. That was my decision. But I could understand where these people were coming from. And so this is the idea of like, we want the science, we want the information, but then the more information that we have, people then make these different decisions that you don't necessarily agree with, but you can't outright say it is blatantly wrong. And so it creates really a very challenging situation.
Oh, this is such a big conversation because you've touched on a lot of different things there that are incredibly complex. One is the fact that we're all different. Our bodies
Hmm.
are all different. I'm very interested in medical misogyny, the fact that women's bodies haven't been studied as much as men's bodies. So, a lot of things that are recommended to us, whether it's a particular type of treatment, whether we're being diagnosed with something, whether it is something that we're putting into our bodies, hasn't been tested properly on us. So, there's a big picture issue there about whether what's right for everybody is right for you
Yeah.
individually. Secondly, there's the fact that science evolves and it changes. Yes, it is robust when it's peer reviewed and tested over time, but anything new that comes out, of course, there are going to be questions about it. And that's very, very normal. So, yes, you're right. These important conversations do take place online. And at the end of the day, it highlights the importance of critical thinking. I'm certainly not anti technology, anti AI. I write and I speak about the drawbacks and the benefits, but I also write and speak about the wonderful positives as well as the negatives because we've just got to approach this fourth industrial revolution, this time of great dislocation in society, with our critical thinking caps on. Do our own research with independent sources, ask the experts, and then make a decision based on that. And then, of course, talk to our children and the next generation about it because we
Hmm.
think young people are digital natives, but they're not necessarily critical thinkers.
No, and you know what's really interesting to me about the development of AI? There is not a single other technology that we've developed that we have implemented without some form of guardrails. Cars are a technology. We have traffic lights, we have stop signs, we have road rules, we have seat belts, we have airbags. Those are all regulated and those are all safety guardrails. You would not get into a car if there were no seat belts and no airbags. And I don't understand why people struggle to see the same thing with AI. Maybe it's a case of that it's not physical, it's intangible, and so people don't see the risks as immediately as they do with a car. But this idea of putting guardrails around AI is not extraordinary. It's actually entirely basic, and it's something we've been doing for decades and decades and decades with all other technologies. Computers are another example. There are regulations around like the materials used for your battery so it doesn't blow up when you turn your computer on, from overheating. Like these are normal things. But so I think it's two things with AI. One, I think it's that it is intangible. So, even though you might access the apps through your phone, the app itself is intangible. And I think the second thing is the narrative around AI. And I know you talk about this a lot in your book, Man-Made. The way that we talk about AI in the public sphere is that we anthropomorphize it. We talk about it as being far more capable than it actually is. And we talk about it through this very elusive cloud of, this technology developing of its own accord and, with its own mindset and all of these things. And I think that those narratives are part of the reason why people have this misunderstanding of this technology and think that it is far more unique and revelatory than it actually is.
And they're deliberate narratives.
They
Big
are.
tech has created these technologies to mimic humans, so we use them more because it's the attention economy. They also deliberately stereotype with the female voice chatbots in the home, the
Mm-hmm.
male voice chatbots in the workplace, because as humans, our brains are wired to go towards stereotypes, which was very helpful when we were on the savannah and being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, and we could say, aha, I've stereotyped that as dangerous, I better run up a tree. But it's not very helpful in the modern workplace at a time when we need to celebrate difference of thinking and diversity, inclusion, and equity, which has unfortunately become a dirty word in the United States. But on the
Yeah.
car example, I find that a really interesting one because, yes, seatbelts were developed, but it took decades after the advent of the automobile for them to be created. So, what we see throughout history is humans get very excited about new, shiny things. That's something else that's a particularly human thing. But it takes us a long time to realise the dangers. So the legal regulations always lag technological advancements by decades. And this is a question I want to put back to you, particularly in your area of expertise around safety and warfare. How concerned are you that this lag of legislation will be an existential threat to humanity this time?
One of the things I talk about a lot in my work and in the public initiatives that I do is refocusing the focus on humans rather than the technology. And I do this because I specifically work in the military domain. When we talk about these technologies in warfare, they didn't magically appear in different in different equipment, in different weapon systems. They didn't magically appear in them. There were conscious decisions that were made across a life cycle of these systems to get them to that point. And one of the things that we do is we say there are existing regulations and existing procedures that militaries have to follow in order to develop, acquire, and implement a weapon system. And we're saying that AI is not exempt from that. But the challenge that we're having in this is this public narrative you were talking about of people saying, oh, it can't be regulated. AI can't be regulated because it is too opaque and it's too this and it's too that. So I don't see AI causing an existential threat to humanity when implemented in the military domain as the technology itself. What I see as posing a threat is human decision making and the illusion of an absence of liability that they're able to pursue by hiding behind that technology. That's where the threat is. And I think it's important for us to take a step back and remember that this technology doesn't develop with a mind of its own. And in fact, no technology does. All technology is developed incrementally over time, and we can monitor and regulate those increments. But to your point about regulation always lagging behind technical advancement, That is correct. And regulations, like you said, have often been in response to a problem as opposed to in anticipation of them. So I don't know this for sure, but I imagine the seatbelts were probably developed after a few crashes where people were like, I think we should do something about this. And so what we're trying to do in the work that I'm doing, at least, is be preemptive and be anticipatory in the work that we're doing and try and build regulations. But it's tough, and it's tough because exactly what you said, those public narratives. And I think maybe this is what I was trying to get at with my earlier question around impartiality, because those narratives aren't impartial. And so I think that's where, sometimes you look at these media platforms and you think, aren't you supposed to be impartial to allow the listener and the audience to have some kind of critical thinking and come to their own perspectives? But your point was really interesting when you said that you don't really agree with this idea of impartiality because no one is really impartial.
Yes, because of unconscious bias.
Yeah.
Your phrase that you mentioned before, the illusion of the absence of
Liability.
liability, reminds me of big tech's approach to scraping artists' images, scraping authors' words to
Yes, I know
use.
your book. I know they have scraped it. With no credit, no permission.
No payment, no
No,
compensation to anybody. And look, it's happening to, millions of creatives around the world. But when you talked about that illusion of the absence of liability, I think I had a light bulb moment when you said that, because it's like a deliberate illusion that's been created by big tech that we should think they should have no liability. I mean, OpenAI has pretty much said that with its creation of the image generator DALL-E, where we're not breaching copyright, we're not copying any artist's work, but we are scraping all of them and using them for products that we then sell to the public, which to my mind is theft. I mean, if you
it
steal all the
is.
words out of an author's book and then you make money out of that, that is theft on a grand scale. So I think we've had the wool pulled over our eyes by this tech oligopoly. I wonder how long it will take for people to genuinely fight back. At the moment, we're still getting our heads around it. Do you think it'll take quite some time?
I do. I do. I don't think it'll take time for us to fight back, but I think it will take time for us to see the results of that because they already have such a strong footing in the field. We have these, the five big tech companies, they have this huge monopoly. But the biggest reason I think it's going to take time is because we are all in some fashion addicted to technology and it is integrated and embedded so deeply in our lives that removing that technology from our lives is not easy. So we all use these technologies predominantly for free. Most platforms have some free version with some having, paid versions, but for the most part, you can use a large majority of, Instagram, WhatsApp, all these things for free. And we click yes on the terms and conditions without reading them and asking people, because that would be one really, really powerful way to see change if everybody was to boycott these platforms. That would be a huge incentive to see change. But the likelihood of having millions and millions of people who open up these apps multiple times a day, spend hours on them a day, have, it's connected to their Google accounts, it's connected to their, home systems, it's this, it's that. That's daunting for a lot of people because I do feel like technology slowly crept up on us in that way with how deeply it was integrated into our lives. So I think we can fight back for sure, but I think it's going to take a long time for us to see results on that because I don't think we will get enough people who are willing to go as far as we need to go to get results, which is really to boycotting these systems is the only incentive that is going to get us change more quickly, in my opinion. And it may be a pessimistic view.
I would agree, but also with a caveat, it seems to me to be a generational thing. So,
Yeah.
for example, when I got my first one of these, I thought it was so amazing. As a middle-aged person, I thought it was magical. I called it my boyfriend because I
Did you
wanted
name
it.
him?
Oh, really good question. No, I didn't name him. I
Oh, what
just
a
kept him.
shame.
So I know, right? I should have humanized him more. I guess that's also my generation. We're not used to humanizing,
Anthropomorphizing them.
anthropomorphizing devices. But I wanted him surgically attached to my hand. I honestly thought that if we were going to be going into this transhumanism phase, I would love technology in my body because I've always been interested in technology. But then I suppose also being a little bit more of a mature person when this technology came in, I thought, hang on, there are negatives to this as well as positives, particularly around the privacy issue. When we
Mm,
started having public conversations on Twitter in front of people, I was horrified because usually, that's private. That's a private
yeah.
conversation. Why should everybody be eavesdropping? My daughter, who's 18, is the complete opposite. I said to her, have you got your privacy settings on? Why are you getting these push advertisements when we're in the mall walking past your favorite shop? She said, oh, Mum, don't worry. I get good sales. I get good discounts on that.
Just
So
such a
I
different perspective.
such a different perspective. So I wonder whether if change is going to happen, it's going to come from middle-aged and older people taking to the streets, as well as wonderful academics and experts, because young people uh, are so deeply embedded with these technologies. They're marinating in it every day. They love it. And to them, the benefits of the discounts outweigh the privacy risks.
With these technologies, we'll stick to social media just to keep it a little bit more niche. You have to bleed a lot of your life into these kinds of tools in order to get the benefit back. You have to like certain things so the algorithm knows what to recommend to you. If you keep your location on, it makes even more recommendations. Like you were saying, you were walking through the shops and it was like ding, 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 recommending all these things. What do you think are some of the risks that we're kind of bringing upon ourselves by bleeding so much of our lives into these platforms without fully understanding the repercussions of it?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of existential risks to do with all of that, but also, I mean, our data is being used to make money for global corporations, which will then simply become richer. And the fact that we're blithely handing over our data means that we're part of the machine and we're at the very lowest level of the machine. We are doing unpaid labour. We are handing over something which is immensely valuable information about ourselves, our gender, our age, our likes, our dislikes, our interests without expecting anything in return. And certainly to your point before, we get to use these wonderful toys for free. And isn't that fantastic? And we become addicted to them emotionally, but also we make money off them if we have small businesses. I
That's
remember
true.
whenever Facebook goes down, a lot of women I know who work from the home go, oh, there goes my income for the day. So we do get a lot of
Mm.
benefits out of it, but I don't think those benefits outweigh the unpaid labour and the value of what we're handing over.
Do you think that there is a lack of understanding and awareness of the value of data? And this goes back to that intangible point I was making earlier. Do you think because data is intangible and you can't get direct money from it, people don't understand its value?
I would say that we're starting to understand that more because that phrase that data is the new oil, it's the new
Hmm.
gold, has been around for probably about a decade now. But what I'm hearing more and more in the corporate space is no, 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 it's not that data is the new asbestos. Because and particularly from cybersecurity circles, that so much data out there is dangerous because of the risk to companies of data breaches. So I think we're at a time when the perspective of data is changing. But I would also say that there's a gender and an age aspect to this.
Mm,
One thing I learnt while researching my book Man Made is that women, particularly older women, don't feel like they have a place in this technological revolution
mm.
because of the old fashioned image of the AI guy. And because of that, I mean, I really struggle to put the appropriate privacy settings on everything. Even though I've written a book about technology, I struggle with that. I feel
They
like
make it
I don't
hard.
have the knowledge. They deliberately make it hard. It's opaque. That's absolutely correct. But when we feel like we don't have any kind of tools, agency, or sense of empowerment over our own data, that's when it becomes dangerous because we throw up our hands and we think it's simply too hard.
And the gender point is a really good point. Historically and statistically speaking, women weren't as quote unquote techie as men. And it really did create a barrier to entry for a lot of women. And I've been doing some research for a particular project that I'm doing, and there was this study that came out of the 80s, and they got a computerized voice, a male computerized voice, and a female computerized voice to dictate the same information. And the information was basically, this is how your computer works. And more than 70% of the participants said that they had more trust in the male voice versus the female voice, even though they were saying verbatim the exact same thing. And it's just this societal kind of perspective that women just aren't as quote unquote techie as men.
And the research does show that historically we trust male voices as having more credibility and gravitas
Mhm.
and all that stuff.
And
And in actual
intelligence,
fact,
that's the one that gets me, that they're
it's
more intelligent.
infuriating. It seemed absolutely infuriating. And the research has also shown for decades that girls self select at a larger rate than boys out of maths, science,
Mhm.
engineering, computing kind of subjects, even as early as late primary school, early high
Yeah.
school. So I really admire people like you who are breaking down the barriers, particularly around that engineering piece. I remember I'm from a family of engineers actually,
Oh,
and
really?
when I went to university to do communications, I was astonished that our class, even back in the 1980s, was about 97% female, and the engineering cohort was about 97% male. And a lot of that gender difference that's embedded into the technologies is still happening to this day.
It is. And, with engineering specifically, while we have seen a statistical increase in the number of women who choose to study engineering, we have not seen an equivalent increase in retention of women in the engineering field. And so this just goes to show that it's more than just getting women interested in technology. It's also about changing some of the institutional cultures to allow women to work in the field. So you experienced something where it was 97% women. Did you ever notice any particular kind of stereotypes that were then imparted onto your male colleagues in that particular industry? Like, did you ever notice the flip side of it, or was it just not the case?
We always thought, gosh, there needs to be there need to be more men in journalism because we were doing the journalism stream at university, even though it was a broader communications degree. But then when we went into the workforce, the men were the ones who were rising to the top in leadership positions. So even though it started out very female dominated, it was incredibly interesting. And for the first 25 years of my career, I think I only had one female boss in 25 years.
Did you
And
question
that
where all the men came from, given that you went to university with 97%? Because if it was me, I would be sitting there being like, where did you come from?
I was astonished until I realized that a lot of the blokes came from, oh, he's a mate, he's a friend of the news director.
Ah,
And
okay.
then they got the fast track through to leadership, as well as that idea that somehow men were tougher in journalism. They were
Mhm.
the ones who could do the political reporting, the finance reporting. They could be an overseas correspondent because, women, they have children. It didn't cross their minds that perhaps some of these men they sent overseas were fathers. It's, oh, no, women, they might have children. We better not send them off to a war zone.
This is
So all
ridiculous.
of those structures, in fact, that you were talking about on the flip side with engineering, that mean women leave the profession, lack of leadership
Mhm.
opportunities, sexual harassment and assault, the cultural differences, the microaggressions, the mansplaining in meetings, all of that kind of stuff. They're really structurally embedded in all types of workplaces. But I have a question for you that I've been really wondering about lately, which is, the great Martin Luther King Jr. said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Do you fear that with the tech oligopoly and the power it holds at the moment, that in actual fact that's going to break that rule? We're going to go backwards when it comes to equity and fairness.
This is going to be a pessimistic answer, just for warning. I think equity and fairness have never really existed. I think that we have moved towards strong rose colored glasses about equity and fairness, but they don't actually exist. And I'm speaking about this from the perspective of someone who, I'm the daughter of two immigrant parents. I grew up in Australia as both Lebanese and Australian. I'm a woman. I work in engineering. So, I feel like I just made things a lot more difficult for myself than I needed to. Um, I have experienced fairness and equality on an individual level with wonderful, wonderful human beings who I've met along the way. But at an organizational or institutional level, so those really broader levels, I haven't experienced those things. I've seen the rose colored glasses of, we have lots of diversity, equity, and inclusion, blah, 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 and we do this and we do that. And while I appreciate that those things exist and that they are creating more visibility, the reality of their impact and their effectiveness tells a different story. And so with technology, we saw a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion things in technology, but at the same time, we saw huge amounts of gender bias. And current technology is not the only example of that. So we were talking about cars and seatbelts earlier. Seatbelts still aren't designed for women. They're actually more safe for men than they are for women because the dummies that they use to test them are built on male physicalities, not on female physicalities. And so for me, I don't ever think that we will reach a point of true fairness and equity, but what I hope that we will reach is general fairness and equity for the larger majority.
One thing that jumped out when I was researching the book was this idea of participation washing, that companies like Google, even at the heights of diversity, equity, and inclusion, were putting out these glossy brochures with lots of people of color and people with disability, and it wasn't heteronormative, it all looked so great. But if you dug deeper, the images, particularly of people of color, were of those from the global south who work in the company with very low wages.
Yeah.
And when you looked at the composition of the boards and the executive, predominantly in the global north, where the capital sits, that's where the wealthy people were with position, power, and prestige. So you're right, a lot of it was, rose coloured glasses happening right there with that kind of movement. I do think we need to look at the long game and make
Mm-hmm.
incremental steps forward using technology to help us and calling out the inequities and structural biases within it. What concerns me even more, and this is getting deeply pessimistic, is the conditions are very similar globally to those leading up to the Second World War, particularly with misinformation and disinformation, power sitting in very few hands. And even when I was researching my book 7 years ago, experts were saying we are going to see more wars. We're going to see more conflict because of people going into their camps. We're seeing Andrew Tate, the rise of toxic masculinity again, the celebration of the manosphere, and also toxic femininity with the
Yeah.
excessive, you
5
know,
a.m. morning routines. Oh my
I
God.
know, right? And skincare being pushed onto 12-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
Just
horrific. So we
breaching their
seem to be
skin
going
barrier
like
when it's
that.
still developing.
Oh, I know. It's absolutely horrific. So while the facts tell us we should be pessimistic, I still can't help but have a sliver of optimism there that society in each industrial revolution has always moved forward. We've always come together and we've saved ourselves. And hopefully we can do that this time too.
Well, let's stay on this optimism bandwagon for our lucky last question, which is the question I ask all my guests. So, what is one piece of advice that you have for people for engaging with technology safely and responsibly? So, what is your one responsible bite?
Change starts with education and continues with collective action. What I mean by that is don't feel that you don't have a role to play in this revolution. Every single person does, regardless of who you are as an individual. So learn about the technologies, play with them, protect yourself, but also join together with other like minded people who want to see a safe and responsible AI future. Put pressure on the power brokers, the people in government who are supposed to be looking after the populace, and tell them, hang on, we want you to put some guardrails in place to keep us safe.
I think that's a wonderful, positive place to end on, Tracey. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. As always, you've been incredible to talk to. And for all of our guests, I will leave links to everything in our show notes. I'll leave links to your website and your book and your socials so that everybody can find you. But thank you again. You've been incredible to speak to.
Oh, thank you. I've loved our chat. It was very deep and thought provoking. Thank you, Zena.